All right, down to business.
Now the fun really starts.
What's he going to talk about now? Yeah. So, topic today and probably tomorrow is we want to sort of focus on an aspect of your relationship with God. In terms that it requires awareness of sin. So that is what I'd like our topic to be. Oh no, we're not talking about sin, are we? Yeah, so sin is the topic in terms of, and also this aspect of awareness. But before I talk about that, what I'd like to do is just sort of revise a little bit about the effects of receiving God's love and what it does to your soul. So you've got God who wishes to share God's love, his love with you. So you're half of the soul. So I'll draw you like that. And at the moment, obviously, many of you can't feel who the other half of your soul is. And so in that regard, you're sort of feeling separated from the other half of your soul. But each half of the soul is able to develop a relationship with God independently of the other half. Well, can we say seemingly independently of the other half? So in other words, your desires have to be engaged as a half of the soul in order to receive God's love. So when you engage a sincere desire to receive love from God, which is what prayer is, you will receive some of God's love into your soul, because God always gives to his children what they desire, as long as what they desire is in harmony with love. Right? So God will always answer a sincere prayer. So God is giving this love because of something that's going on inside of you, and that is that sincere longing that goes on inside of you. And that sincere longing draws the Holy Spirit to you and allows the love to flow. G'day, guys. It allows the love to flow to you, right? So God wishes to give this love to you, your half of the soul, and God wishes to, for you, would love for you to receive it. He desires that you receive it. And so God's desire is pure in terms of what he wishes for you. He wants to give you that love, and this is it's a tremendous gift. And to be honest, we haven't really discussed with you what are all the effects of that gift even at this point. So with all the thousands of hours of videos we've done, we still really haven't discussed completely the effects of the gift and the effects of the gift on the soul. But it is extremely powerful, the effects of the gift of God's love being received to your soul. So many of you know from what you've heard already and what you've listened to already, you know that you can pray or long for God's love to be received, and this as long as the longing is sincere, you will receive love from God. And that love will have the effect of starting to transform your soul. And it has another effect as well, in that it has many effects, but some of the effects that are important to remember are it makes you a more sensitive person. So in other words, more sensitive to what love is and what love isn't. It makes you more sensitive to that. It also makes you more generally aware of what's going on around you, what is true, what is real versus what is false or not real. In terms of, it makes you see the contrast between what God created and then what humans create. It also helps you emotionally to become more sensitive, but also more able to cope with stronger emotions and stronger expressions of desire and passion and longing, and also stronger emotions relating to even just having emotions of joy and happiness, these are all stronger as well as a result of receiving the love. But you can see from this equation, and each half can also, independently it seems, right, when you're doing this independent, can receive that love from God as long as the sincere longing, or let's rename it, as long as the prayer is sincere and it comes from your heart, not from your head. As long as the prayer comes from your heart, then of course that connects with God and it connects with the longing, like the longing in you connects with God and connects with him emotionally, actually. It makes him feel like he wants to give this love to you, right? And also, of course, the sincere longing is an opening of the expression of your free will, right? And the reason why the law requires that you have a sincere longing is that it allows God to listen to your expression of your will. So rather than God forcing love upon you, he wishes to give that love only when you desire it, only when you want it. And you can see why, because if he forced it upon you, then you would actually now be being controlled by God rather than being controlled by your own will. Right? So this is why God respects the use of your will in this regard. So many of you have heard all that before, right? That this is what God's got available to you, the love that will come into your soul, start transforming your soul, and as long as you have a sincere longing for it and you express your free will in a passionate way in order to express that longing. So once this begins, you could say your love-based relationship with God begins, which is very different than another type of relationship you can have with God. Because on top of the idea or concept of receiving love, you can also receive truth from God, and that's an independent process. And that independent process, it comes from something that God's developed inside of your soul called your conscience. So when we say the conscience is not really just yours, because the conscience is this pathway where God is able to share truth with you, and therefore it means that the conscience is a combination of your desires as well as God's desires to share truth with you. Now that conscience works for every single person, whether they receive the love or not. Right? Now, of course, the more sensitive you are, the easier the conscience works. Right? But the conscience is the mechanism via which you receive truth. So if I just draw the same diagram again, but here's our soul, our two halves of the soul, right? You could say there's an area where you can connect to God and ask for truth from God. And that can be done independently of receiving love from God. Right? So you could say that a person who asks for truth from God is still developing a relationship with God of a kind, but it's not just loving yet. It's not a desire for love yet. It's a desire for truth first. So oftentimes, truth is the first way that a person has a relationship with God. Their relationship with truth establishes their relationship with God. Right? And then as their relationship with truth develops, they start realizing, one truth is that God has love to give and I can ask for that as well. You can see that both desiring truth and desiring love is going to be dependent upon the use of your will. And it's going to require sincerity still. Because there's what's the point of asking for truth when you're not really interested in the answer? There's not much point to that, is there? And also God knows whether you are interested in the answer. If you're not interested in the answer, then why would God share the answer? There's little point in God sharing something that you're not interested in, because to do so would be to break your exercise of your will. Right? So we've got this relationship with God, which often gets established through the truth process, through the conscience first. In other words, we start to recognise things that are morally right and morally wrong. You could say morals is God's definition of what is right and what is wrong. And through that conscience mechanism, God can share what is right and what is wrong from God's perspective with you. Right? But that doesn't guarantee you're going to receive God's love, because to receive love, you need to ask for it, ask for love. And that requires a sincere desire for the love, not just for truth. Everyone with me so far? Now, if this is the process of, you could say, God sharing truth and God sharing love with you is God wanting to establish a complete relationship with you, his child. You are his child. He wants to inform you. He wants to help you understand what the truth is. He doesn't want you to spend your time on this earth in a state of mystery, or in a state of like being unaware of what you need to do in order to have a happy life. He wants to help you have a happy life. And the way he's going to help you do that is by firstly being able to share some truth with you about what that life is constituted as, what he designed it to be, and then also by sharing some love with you so that you know what he feels about you. You see, the truth can be just an intellectual exercise, can't it? Like, I ask a truth, are there other earths? That's a question I could ask God, and the answer to God, if we open the conscience, he will say yes to that, and then we know the answer. But how does that affect me emotionally? Well, at this stage, I'm bound to this earth, so it probably doesn't affect me emotionally much at all, does it? Except by knowing that things are bigger than what I'm aware of. Aside from that, probably not much of emotional connection with that. But when we ask God for love, now there will be feelings we have that come. And those feelings are going to need to be emotional in order for us to understand what love is. Because love isn't an action. It's a feeling that often then gets transformed by us into actions, right? So the love feeling is what drives the loving actions. Okay? So this is God's desire for all of his children to receive truth and to receive love. And God knows that if you can receive truth and love, you will end up happy. You'll end up not only happy, but in the state of bliss if you receive enough of it, in a state of bliss. Now, most people on earth don't think that's possible, right? And if you think about your own lives, and look back on your own lives, there's a lot of things that happen in your life that you feel like that's not bliss, right? That's not, distress and unhappiness is common. But for the most part, we don't understand even why that is the case, that there's laws that govern why we are unhappy and why we're not happy is able to be fixed if we live more in harmony with those laws. And so the law is going to have an effect on how happy we are, whether we obey the law, so God's laws, whether we obey the reality of those laws or not, will depend on how happy we are or not. So the problem, though, for most people on earth is that we don't know what those laws are. So if we look at laws, we'll talk about laws in a minute. We look at laws, there's a hierarchy of them, and I'll draw up a hierarchy in a minute about those laws. For the majority of times, we do not understand what those laws actually are. So this is why God sharing the truth with us is so important, so he can educate us about the law. Right? You want to ask? Yeah, as long as it's on the topic. Yes. Chin, on your chin. Yes. Right up on your chin, that's it.
I'm curious when you're starting out on this path, when you ask God a question, you're looking for truth, how you can know if that answer is actually coming from God.
Yes, now in this trip that's been asked quite a number of times, and so my suggestion is to go back and listen to some of this the recordings from this trip we've already put up. I probably don't want to go into that right now because the subject of sin is a very important subject that I want to focus my intention on. But yes, there are ways to tell as to what the source of any truth is. And God, of course, wants you to know what the source is. He doesn't want you to be to trust information that you don't know where it comes from. And if you think about the earth today, a lot of what's going on earth today is the opposite of that, isn't it? Like, there's a whole lot of information you're being prepared with, presented with. And so for the recording, I'll just say there's a truck outside loading its bin with I think it's I don't know.
Now you're getting distracted.
Now I'm getting distracted. So like, now I've forgotten what I was going to say.
God, what's happening on earth today is
Yes.
that we're being asked to trust a lot of information that we don't know the source
That you
of.
don't know the source.
Yeah.
And if you look at things like the media, who are meant to be like a trusted source of information, our experience with them has been, like, I think of the 70 to 100 people that we've met from the media, quite a lot we've met, probably 2 of them were honest, and the rest created lies. So that doesn't bode well for the rest of the things that are getting presented in the media, in the sense that most people think the media are a trusted source, and yet there's a whole heap of information coming from them that a lot of people trust, but obviously they're lies, because our personal experience has been they've been lies. So God wants you to not only be able to trust the information, but trust the source of the information. Now, of course, the source of information can also not be God, can it? Can't it? It can be people on earth, people you chat with, talk to. It can be people in the spirit who share information through their connection with you. And all of that information will be dependent upon how close they are to God as to whether that information is truthful. Right? The closer they are to God, the more truthful the information will be. Right? But here we're talking specifically about the truth that comes from God directly, and also the love that comes from God directly. There are many reasons, there are many actually sins that are in a person that may mean that their longing is not sincere to get that information from God, and so they will receive that information from others. So the key way of determining whether the information you're getting is actually truthful and coming from God is to measure, or to be able to measure, how sincere you are. But the problem with that is the more sin you're in, the less sincere you are. So now we've got a bit of a problem in that we engage relationships not based upon love, but rather based upon our addictions or our sins. And unfortunately, that's going to encourage information to be shared with us from sources that are untrustworthy. And so that's a big problem that many of us face. And this is why relationship with God requires an awareness of sin. Because if you act upon your sin in your relationship with God, then nothing you do is going to be sincere. And if it's not sincere, then of course God is not responding. So then the question becomes, if you get a response, who's it from? It's got to be from someone else. Someone who's okay with you not being sincere. Right? And if you look at the world today, and particularly, well, pretty much in most societies now, insincerity is a huge thing, isn't it? Like, Mary were watching the other day some people with the mobile phones taking pictures, weren't you, of themselves?
In
Selfies,
the airport.
right?
In the airport. And it was funny to me. I don't have social media. I don't know what goes on, but I watched 2 separate people. Some people from Asia and some people from Ireland were sitting separately, and they were mid-meal, and someone lifted a
so they were talking normally.
Phone up, and they just lifted it up. Nobody said anything, but the two girls both pouted and did I can't do it. And then within 5 minutes at the other table, exactly the same thing happened with the same pose and everything. And nobody's sincere in that photo, are they? You know.
No. So, and yet that's sort of accepted in the world as somehow normal. I don't see it as very, very normal. I suspect their psychological welfare if they were doing it, but obviously something that the world sort of accepts as normal, and yet it's very insincere. Yep. Often you see that with politeness, don't you? You know, people are polite with each other, but oftentimes not based on their feelings. It's more just based on, if I present a facade of politeness, then I'll get what I want because of the facade. But that's not sincere either. There's many times in society where sincerity is lacking, right? Many people feel angry, but they never express it sincerely. Many people feel sad, but they never express it sincerely. You know, you see sincerity lacking in many, many aspects of society on earth, and it's the sincerity that determines whether God responds or not. Right? So up the back there.
Can you talk a little bit about the truth revealed by God in the Bible?
No, I don't want to get on that topic
No?
at all. Yep, I want to focus on the topic I'm on. Yep,
Thank you.
Yep. All right. So far, all I'm doing here is just giving a overview of how you receive love and how you receive truth. Now, many of you have heard it all that before, right? And you think you're having a sincere longing, but you often don't know whether you're receiving love or not, right? Now, trust me, when God gives love to you, you will know, right? So even that is indicative of something going wrong with sincerity. So the biggest problem we face, and the red marker doesn't rub out properly, does it?
No, but go for it. It
Go for
rubs
it.
out. Yeah.
There'll be red marks. Red, bad for the moment, right? The biggest problem we face is our sin causes a lack of sincerity, us to be insincere, right? That's what sin causes. It causes insincerity. So if I want a relationship with God, can you see there's got to be a relationship also between recognising my sin, because if I can't recognise my own sin, then I will be naturally insincere in my longings, and those insincere longings will mean I'm thinking that I'm longing to God, but obviously God's not responding because he only responds to sincere longings, and therefore any response I'm getting can't be from God, it's going to be from someone else. And if I trust those responses under those circumstances, I'm more than likely going to be setting up relationships with people on earth or in the spirit world that are going to be damaging to my relationship with God. Right? So you can see why this aspect of sin, so I'll just put that in there as this colour as well, why the aspect of sin is such an important thing to become aware of. Now, awareness is not the only thing required with regard to sin. Eventually you have to awaken to it. Now, there's a big difference between awareness and awakening to sin. But you could say the process of awakening begins with awareness. Right? So initially what's happening is the majority of us are in denial of sin. Right? We deny we are sinning. And we do that for lots of reasons. It's not just because we purposefully deny. A lot of times we've been brought up in an environment that denies sin. We've been taught to deny sin during our life. We've learnt also, many of us emotionally, we've learnt over the years to try to push things down and keep it suppressed and shove it down. And this causes us to get into a state of denial of sin as well. So there's many reasons why we end up in the state where we deny sin. Some of them are our own choices, a fair majority actually are our own choices, but some of them have almost been forced upon us in childhood to deny sin. You know, many of you, we know some of you have had quite hard childhoods. You know, you were taught to deny the sin of others in that place, right? And so naturally you're going to have an inclination to deny your own as well as a result of that. So the denial of sin is a big problem with regard to relationship with God, because the problem is if I'm in a sinful place, my longings can't be sincere. And while my longings are not sincere, therefore I can't sincerely pray while my longings are not sincere. For many of us, our longings are for our addiction, not for love. For many of us, we long for barter. We long, I do this for you, you do this for me, that kind of thing. And we have that relationship, many of us, we attempt to have that relationship with God. Now, of course, God does not respond to that, but spirits who are in dark conditions will. They'll enter that barter very willingly. And so this is something that we've got to address, the sincerity of our longings. And the sincerity of our longings are completely determined by how much sin we're in. And this is why there needs to be an awakening to sin in order for longing for God's love to actually become purely motivated. Yeah? Ask over here.
No, thanks. A memory comes to me of you saying that. No, I can't remember. But sorry. It's that.
Is it gone from your mind? Or
I think it went. Yeah, as soon as
No,
maybe I've been given the answer, and the answer is don't speak. Maybe the answer is
don't wave the mic
is
around.
Don't bother any. Yeah, don't wave the mic around. I'll think about it. Is
No
that
worries.
okay with everyone? Yeah.
No worries. Yep. Anyone else want to ask? Yep. So just behind there and over here.
Yes. Can I?
Just hang a sec.
So can the sin also be our false beliefs about God, that God is like our parents? So,
well, this is what we want to get to. I want to describe the categories, if you like, of our sin and which ones are more important than other sins. Because a lot of us, what we do is we recognize some sin, but we don't understand what are the most important sins. And if you deal with the most important sins first, naturally that'll have the largest effect on your relationship with God. If you deal with your least important sins first, then obviously relationship with God is going to take some time to develop and in terms of becoming sincere. This is where I'm headed with the discussion. So we'll get back to that over here.
Hello. All right. Is it ever possible to receive God's love while still holding on to unworthiness?
Well, if you think of unworthiness, that's an example of an emotional sin. Yeah. So from God's perspective, you are worthy to receive God's love. He created you as the pinnacle of his creation. So from God's perspective, you thinking you're unworthy is even a sin, right? The key is to find out, well, why do I want to continue thinking I'm unworthy? And that is often driven by fear of others and fear of emotions that happen in your childhood. And this is why it's important for you to at least become aware of the sin. So in other words, yes, unworthiness is a sin. So now I've said that, you're aware. But you're not awake to it until you feel it's a sin. You understand the difference?
Yeah, I know it's a sin, but I don't feel it. Yeah,
correct. And this is why we need to have the discussion. We need to work out what's the process that we have to go from a state where we're in total denial of there being a problem into a state where we're at least intellectually aware, and then as time progresses into a state where we're so awake to it that it feels bad to do it anymore. That's where we need to go. with regard to our sin.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it will hopefully become clear over the course of the next 2 days what we need to do that. If we go up the back to Sarah.
Does God give us feedback on our sin?
God desires to give you feedback on your sin, yes. It's one of God's strongest desires, actually. And you can understand why, because God knows that while you're in the state of sin, your longings won't be sincere. And so one of the things God wants to do with every one of us is show you how you sin. Of course, that's pretty tricky if we're in a state of arrogance, isn't it? It's like to actually begin a relationship with God, and then the very first things you start receiving is, you're doing this wrong, and you're doing that wrong, and you're doing this wrong, and you're doing that wrong. I'm doing so many things wrong, and then you can get all sorts of responses to that, all sorts of emotional and spiritual responses to you becoming aware that you actually do of things that you thought you were doing right that actually turn out to be wrong. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So this is all part of where we're headed with the discussion, and then we'll get to answering a lot of the questions about it, right? So at this stage, I'd like you to understand, you can understand the link between awareness, needing to have awareness, versus the ability to receive love. Can you see that link? If my sin causes me to be insincere, then naturally the law, God's law, will measure that insincerity. And once that insincerity is measured, now the law can't, the law can only respond by correcting insincerity. It's not going to respond to the actual prayer, because the prayer itself, driven by insincerity, is no longer a prayer from God's perspective, right? And so therefore there will be no response. And the same goes even with our relationship with truth. If I'm in a state where I don't really want to know the truth, but I'm asking because I've been told I should, right, then that's an insincere state. And naturally that insincere state is going to have no response from God, but may have responses from other people and spirits who are insincere themselves and are happy with your insincerity, right? God wants a real relationship with you, not a relationship based upon anything that's fake. He wants it to be real. He wants you to be real. He'll be real. He wants you to be real. And a lot of our sin causes us to not even be real anymore. We even create a complete facade, and many times our facades, we create many of them. So some people have a facade with their partner even the partner they've lived with for many, many years. They have a facade with their mum and dad that's different to the facade with their partner. Then they have a facade with their children that's different to both of the prior ones. And then they have a facade that they present at work, which is different to what they would present at home. And then they have a facade when they go out to dinner, which is different to the facade that in all the other places. And every one of these facades is us not being real, therefore being insincere. And if you're in that state and you then start to long for God's love, but you're in this insincere state, there will be no answer. And this is why many people find themselves, they progress a little bit with regard to listening to truth, listening to God's truth. They receive a bit of love, and then after that, they can't receive any more, because there's so many areas of insincerity that they are not addressing. So we keep that in mind. And now what we want to do is look at the issue of the sin itself and the hierarchy of law that governs it. And can I flick this over?
You can. It's not been done before.
Just pull that out.
Okay.
Right. So, what governs what is sin? Well, what governs what is sin is God's laws. So we could draw the laws as sort of in a hierarchical manner, and it's going to look a bit sort of The way I'm going to draw it is going to look a bit unintuitive initially, but we'll see how we go. I'm going to draw like a big triangle where the most important sins are to do with what we believe spiritually. In other words, things related to love, truth, faith, humility, and similar other kinds of principles that govern our life.
And God. We need to put God, our beliefs about God in there.
Of course,
yeah.
So you could say these are, you could say the number one priority. They are the things that affect our life the most. Now, it's very interesting because a lot of people don't believe that. And this is something in the discussions we've had with others while we've been going around this trip. You know, there was a discussion we had in England where a person was asking about his sexual feelings, and I was trying to always bring him back to the spiritual principle that guided the feeling. And he was always wanting me to go back to the sexual problems that he was facing rather than avoid the spirit. And he wanted to avoid the spiritual principle. And I'm trying to take him back to the spiritual principle, and he's trying to take me back to the sexual problem. And I said in the end, we can't discuss your sexual problem until you understand the spiritual principle. You follow? And so this is why the spiritual, and it'll become plain in our discussion why the spiritual principles are the most important to address. These are, if we had to draw a scale of hierarchy of sin, where we're going up in the scale of our sins, the sins that are spiritual in nature are affecting us the most. Right, so this is very important to understand about your life. The things that are spiritual in nature will affect how you sin the most. In other words, your beliefs about love, your beliefs about truth, your beliefs about faith, what you have faith in, your beliefs about humility, and other aspects that are all principles. In the 2016 assistance groups, if any of you know about those, in the last group we talked about principles, 17 of them, that guide most of God's laws. So any principle that was in that list that we presented then is going to be added to this list, and anything where you're out of harmony with that principle is going to have the biggest effect on your life. The biggest effect on your ability to feel love, the biggest effect on your sincerity with regard to your relationship with God, going to be determined by those principles. So spiritual matters are number one priority. Right? Then we come down to number two, which are emotional matters. There's a reason why these have a high effect on you in terms of how you sin. Your emotions and how you feel about things drive many of your sins, right? And if you combine your emotions with your spiritual beliefs, now you've got a huge driving force driving most sins, right? Any spiritual belief that's out of harmony with God's truth, and any emotion out of harmony with the way God designed your soul to operate, both of those combine and they will cause you to take actions and do things that are going to be extremely sinful from God's perspective, right? So the emotional part of your life, very important part of what's contributing to insincerity with regard to sin. Then we have this area of life which is a large effect on sin on earth, particularly at the moment, right? Which is the sexual side of your nature. God designed you to have sexual feelings. These feelings were important in determining romance, and therefore important to determine a lot of things about your attractions to your other half, to your soul mate. And also they bring a lot of beautiful feelings into your life. So they are a big part of your life, but if you're out of harmony with truth with regard to how God designed you to be in regard to sexual nature, that is also going to contribute to how much sin. But notice it's less than the emotional side, and it's less than the spiritual side. If this is a hierarchy, you can see the spiritual thing is at the top, emotional next, sexual part of your life next, and then the last part of your life is going to be the physical part of your life. Things that you do, just physically do without much thought, and those kind of things can be sins too. And we can talk about that as well. Obviously, when we're in a state of sin, the hardest sins to recognise, ironically, are frequently the most important ones. And the easiest ones to recognise are often the least important ones. Right? And this is a problem that most of us face in humanity, is that we're not seeing how God prioritised his laws compared to how humans prioritise laws. You think about human law, how many laws are there that govern your emotional feelings? Like in Canada, do you have any? In Australia, we don't have any. Right? How many laws are there that govern your sexual feelings? Now, there are some, aren't there, in some countries? You notice that? Some countries have established law, and for many of those countries, erroneously so, they've established law about, for instance, gay marriage, where they haven't allowed it. They won't allow it, right? So that's an example of the government establishing a law. So it is common for some governments to establish laws, and you see religions establish many of those sexual laws too, don't they? Right? So they establish a sexual law without any consideration of spiritual, emotional principles involved in those laws. They just establish a sexual law because they think that that's the law that will apply, right? And then they create it, and then they try and enforce it. So you see that sexual laws have been established in religion and also in governments historically, right? Physical laws, of course, we get them all the time, don't we? In fact, for most of us, we have a tax code in most Western countries that, would probably take half of this room to fill up the volumes. It was all printed. You need a library this big to store all the tax law. And then you'd need, what about all the criminal law? Then there's another whole set of what defines criminal behaviour, right? Which is really all just about physical actions. It's not looking at the intention of the individual. It's looking just at what they did, right? So this is our problem on earth. We've grown up in an environment where there's a deep focus on physical law, less of a focus on sexual law, and then no focus at all on these higher laws, almost. Yeah, Adrian?
Can you talk about why? Like, how did we get it so backwards? Does it matter to talk about that, or?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why. The primary one was the very first sin the first human couple engaged in, which is the desire to be gods themselves. In other words, they desired that they were the ones who determined what was right and what was wrong, rather than God determining it. In that process, we instead of listening to what God's laws were or trying to determine what they were, we're now establishing our own law. Our own desires become the law. And when that occurs, we have a tendency to walk away from particularly these two groups, and even this group of laws that govern our happy life, and instead we just focus on creating physical laws. And the more distant we get from spirituality, and the more distant we get from emotions, the more we do that. So the problem for many on earth now is we're so distant from any spiritual concepts. concepts about love, truth, faith, humility that we live by as a principle, we're so distant from those principles that we don't even think that there's laws that even govern those principles and govern how they work and govern, and govern penalty versus reward with God's system. Yeah.
You'd have to also say that people are so detuned from all these things that they can't reach consensus to make a law because they're so...
If I'm setting myself up as God and you're setting yourself up as God and you and I are in complete disagreement as to what the law should be, you're going to say your law is right, I'm going to say mine is right. We can't reach a consensus at all. So I'm going to do what I think is right and you will do what you think is right.
Whereas a physical thing, we measure that. And people don't have to tune into, well, what was the motivation of that physical action? Just we're going to look at the physical law. Yeah.
And can I ask one more thing?
Yeah.
Was there ever a time on Earth that those 1 and 2 were more important? Like, was there ever a significant amount of time?
No.
We fell away from that so quickly.
Yeah. A modern and man were created, we were just talking about it the other day, I think it's about 179,000 years ago on Earth. And there's a few other digits in there, but it's about that figure. And they were, as soon as they chose to disobey God, from that moment on, laws started to get established, mostly family-based laws that started to get established originally, that were all in disharmony to those spiritual and emotional principles. And since then, there's been no society that has brought themselves into harmony with those spiritual and emotional principles. Yeah. Now, there's been a cycle of around 4 times where humanity has developed in technology and then degraded in technology over those 180,000 years. And each time they increased in technology to the point where they destroyed their own Earth to the extent that the Earth had a cataclysmic change. And then everything got reset back to what you would classify as... what's the word I'm looking for?
Like primitive
times where people are now having to, bind a rock to a stick to get an axe, that kind of thing, and just eke out a living. And so there are quite a few times in human history where the technology was far more powerful even than the technology we have today, just in different direction. But still, the principles of spiritual principles and emotional principles didn't govern their lives. Yeah. Yep. And so this is a common problem with our earth life, is that without understanding that these spiritual and emotional principles are, from God's perspective, the very highest of all laws, then we're not going to understand how we sin and therefore how to be happy. So a lot of societies, there were a number of societies in the past on this earth who got to a stage where they didn't have war anymore, right? But they still didn't develop these principles very well at all. They just worked out that war wasn't good for everyone, right? Which, if you think about it, if we were all intelligent, we'd already know that. Wouldn't we? Yeah. So unfortunately, the problem is the spiritual and emotional, in particular, those 2 areas of life, very rarely have there been any laws made at all about those things. Yep. All about physical and usually sexual things. Yeah. Come over here.
Are you going to delve into some depth on the principles on the spiritual area? Because I really want to ask about one, but if you're going to delve into them later, I'll...
Well, this is our opportunity over the weekend. So the next 2 days, what we would like to do is give examples of physical things, give examples of sexual things, give examples of emotional things, where we believe something is right and where, from God's perspective, that thing is morally wrong.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I'll wait till you do it.
Yeah, Kevin.
Thank you. So are there hundreds of these principles, millions of these principles, infinite, or is it like, how would you measure it?
Law, with regard to law, there's not an infinite number of laws that govern the universe. There are an potentially infinite number of laws that govern everything, but not the physical universe. Obviously, the physical universe is governed by physical laws that control the universe. There is a hierarchy of the number of laws that apply to different things. So if a thing is physical, that's the lowest number of laws, of which there are literally millions, billions probably. But everything from here up, you'll notice, from this point up, is related to the human soul. So the bottom thing here relates to everything there is. So physical laws regarding everything there is, matter with regard to matter, how matter combines, the scope of it, how the whole universe operates, all the laws that govern the interaction of bodies in the universe, including your body, they're all physical laws. And then there's above that, there's all the laws that affect the human soul, right? That God created specifically because your soul is the powerfulest thing in this universe. Okay. And he created these laws, not a V there, just a U. He created these laws to govern the soul. So actually, there are more laws governing the soul than there are governing the universe.
Wow. And has anybody in the, higher planes, I'm assuming, ever kind of cataloged this type of stuff?
Of course, there are people in the spirit world. You can go to libraries in the spirit world and actually read what people have catalogued as the physical laws, what they believe are the sexual laws and so forth. When a person becomes at one with God, the law is written on your heart. So there is no longer a reason to categorize them or to have a list of them, right? What happens is once the law is in your heart, the love that's present there causes you to know instantly, even with a law that you've never found before, to know instantly whether it was right or wrong to do something once you consider it. So that's the beauty. So God wants to simplify it for you because the universe, if you're looking at it very intellectually, the universe is highly complicated. And the soul is even more complicated than the universe, actually. The most complicated thing in the physical universe, so we're just talking sort of this earth-based physical universe, the things you can see, is your physical body, actually. The laws governing your physical body are the biggest laws of the most vast variety compared to the laws governing the universe itself, right? Then, when it comes to your spiritual existence, so when you die and you pass into the spirit world, you've got your spirit body, the laws governing the spirit body are even more complicated than the laws governing your physical body, right? And if you had to understand them all, you'd be studying it like infinitely, probably. And there are spirits in the sixth sphere who haven't connected to God, who have been like part of the medical profession on earth and things like that, who've been studying these laws for their entire existence. And I'm talking hundreds of thousands of years, some of them. They've been studied, not connected to God, but trying to study those laws. There are so many of them. And sort of go, well, if there's so many of them, and if I break one, it's a sin. Can you see? It's far better to focus on principles than it is on the laws. Now, with principles governing law, there are a lot fewer. You could basically boil down the principles to less than 200 principles governing all the laws that exist.
So you're not going to get them all done this weekend? Is that what we're saying?
No.
All right.
Impossible. Impossible. Yeah, all we can do is bring some examples and also help you with how to determine whether the law, whether the law is based on one of the principles, what law is based on the principle and how the principle is failing when you break the law. This will help you become aware. The more aware we are, the more sincere we become. The more sincere we become, the more our longings are sincere. We have a higher likelihood of receiving God's love then. Make sense?
Thank you.
Yep. We go straight back to Ed and Ellie, straight back.
Hello.
Hello.
So for the spiritual, I'm a little bit confused because with the difference between soul and spiritual, because they're the highest is spiritual, but I thought the soul was the highest.
Well, here we're talking about the laws, aren't we? Not the soul specifically. Now, if you think about the human soul, it could not exist in the universe without laws governing its existence. Make sense? So you could say the laws are more important than the soul itself, because without the law, the structure, the soul couldn't physically exist. So when we talk about these principles that govern God's laws, you can see the laws themselves provide a framework in which your soul can live. Now, in that regard, the law is more important than your soul. So even though you are the highest of God's creations, you could say the laws that govern you are even higher. And the reason why that is because they're not a creation of God, they are a part of God's nature. So they are actually a part of how God feels about everything. And that existed way before your soul was ever thought of. Right? And way before your body was thought of, way before all of those things were thought of, you could say the structure had to exist. If the structure didn't exist, then those bodies and your soul could not exist without the structure pre-existing.
Yes.
Make sense? Yes. So this defines the structure in which the highest physical creation, the soul that God created, that highest creation is going to be determined in terms of, you could say, governed by the laws, right? If the soul was not governed by law, then we wouldn't have to have a discussion about sin. We wouldn't have to have a discussion about, well, pretty much anything, and also it's pretty unlikely that that could even be a possibility, because for something to exist, a law must govern its existence.
Yes.
You follow?
Yes.
Yep. And so from God's perspective, and this is why I love God's truth, from a technical perspective as well, right, is that you can see that it makes a lot of sense to understand that without a structure pre-existing, things can't exist inside of that structure, right? So there has to be a structure, which we're calling law, which governs how everything operates. So for example, when they make a car, which was first sort of thought up, a self-motivated vehicle in the late 1700s, they started thinking about it, and then in the late 1800s they started thinking about how to do it, and then they worked through issues of combustion eventually, and then what they did in the early 1900s started mass producing a vehicle. But it required them to understand a lot of laws first. They had to understand the laws of smelting, putting things together, making metal. They had to work out how hot they had to allow certain metals to heat to. If you have combustion inside of an engine that's going to generate heat, how do they cool that down? They had to work through laws of thermodynamics. They had to work through laws of, obviously having sort of just rails as tyres is very bumpy along a bad road. They had to work through laws of pneumatics governing how do we make sure the suspension works, and all these things had to be worked out, and they were all law-based principles they had to discover in order to build the car, right? Now, we're still bearing the benefits, couldn't we? Because we get to move around a lot with a vehicle, the benefits of all those discoveries. But they were all defined by the laws they discovered. If you look at your mobile phone, it's the same principle. There's a whole heap of laws that had to be discovered in order for the mobile phone to be developed. So years and years ago, in the 1700s and 1800s, there were books written about these fancy devices where you'd be able to pick them up and talk to somebody and see a picture. So they had some idea that they were even possible, and often these things are inspired by spirits to show they are possible. And then somebody had to discover every single law. And if you look at the laws in a mobile phone, in most of your mobile phones, there are, on the average, around 20 to 80 billion devices inside of your mobile phone, right?
Components, you mean?
devices like transistors. Years ago, a transistor was like this big, or a valve was like this big, and if you had to put it in a mobile phone, you'd have to make a building probably as big as half of the country to do it. And now they've miniaturized all that down, and the average mobile phone has anywhere from 20, I think it's up to about 120 billion transistors, these devices inside of it, which they had to work out the law of how to even design them and build them, and the principles involved in what's called doping of certain materials in order to have materials act in different ways. They had to understand materials. It was a whole heap of laws that had to be discovered just for you to have a mobile phone. And every single law, and including the laws of communication, radio communication, antennas, and all the laws governing speed of light transmission, or just subspeed of light transmission, they all had to be discovered in order for you to have a mobile phone. Wow. Now, that took hundreds of years for those laws to be discovered. Hundreds and hundreds of years, And it was a slow, gradual process where humanity learnt a law about, say, metals, and then learnt a law about how to dope a metal and change its characteristics with another substance, and then they had to learn a law about communication and how to communicate and how to send radio waves and how they work. They had to learn all those laws, and eventually, by learning all of those laws, they could make your phone. And now you can use your phone. And now you pick up your phone, you use it, and you don't even think about it, do you? All the laws that had to be made, all those discoveries for centuries that had to be uncovered in order for you to have that device in your hand, right? And this is the thing, is that we are on Earth, many scientists and people are focused on finding the physical laws, because every time they find a physical law, there's a benefit to humanity in one way or another, if they can use the law properly. But there's no focus at all in finding those laws and how those laws might benefit humanity. Right? If you think about, if you presented to the average person on Earth that there are sexual laws that govern whether you're going to be happy sexually or not, the average person would laugh at you, right? But there are, right? And the same principles apply with the physical law as they do to the sexual, emotional and spiritual laws. If you discover them and you put them into practice, the result is going to be to your benefit. That makes sense? Yep. Now, what we call sin is when we choose to live our life in disharmony with that law. Now, of course, when we live our life in disharmony with the law, there will be consequences. So with regard to your mobile phone, for example, there's radiation that comes from it. Now, if that radiation is strong enough, like microwave strength, if it was that strong, your brain would be literally fried within a few minutes and you'd die, right? So if you misuse that law, you will die. So when I was doing my engineering, they said we can't climb towers with microwave antennas on them unless we switch them all off, which you can understand why, right? Because if you're right by them and you're trying to do some work, within minutes your brain can be absolutely heated to the point where you die. Yep. So this is an example of a law, and they work out with the law. If I break it, then I'm going to be in trouble, right? And so on the physical level, humankind has been very focused on what is the law and how far can you go with it? What's the law? So an example of that is, when you go to the doctor and you get an X-ray, well, there's actually radiation coming from that device, and that radiation, if it was to an extreme level, would kill you within a few years. You'd develop cancers, your physical body would develop cancers and you'd die, right? If it was too extreme. So what they had to do is design a device that allows you to get that irradiated pattern, from your skeleton onto some kind of image without it killing you in the process. So to do that, they had to find the limit of the human body with regard to radiation. What are those limits? What were they going to do with those limits? How would they impose those limits? They had to understand the law that governed radiation to a degree where they could use it without harming you. Use it to your benefit without harming you. So again, an example of a physical thing humans had to discover in order to find out how it would harm you or how it could benefit you. You follow? Yes. Yeah. Now, the big unfortunate thing is we haven't done that in these areas of our life. We've only done it, and humans are totally dedicated to doing it here in the physical area of your life, but humans haven't done it in these areas of your life. There's been barely any consideration of these areas of your life and how you can be happy or sad based on whether you break the law or you live in harmony with it. Yeah?
And Jesus, really, aren't you saying that the sexual, emotional and spiritual laws, when we try to live outside of them, there's actually more penalty and more unhappiness for living outside of those laws than even
Correct.
for breaking physical laws?
You think of the things that makes you the most unhappy in your life. Yeah. Aren't they your relationships? Yes. They make you more unhappy than, say, breaking your leg. Right? When you break your leg, you get it set, it'll heal, you know it's going to heal 6 weeks later, generally. You know, a few months later, it's nice and sturdy, and it can heal to the point where you feel just almost as good as you were at the beginning, right? But when it comes to a broken heart, how long does that take you? Takes you. People have had a broken heart and never fix it their entire life, right? So these areas of your life are going to have a bigger impact on your happiness than this area. And yet we're focused on earth, we're focused on this physical area only, when we're not determining the laws that govern the other areas of our life.
So can we flip the triangle then?
Flip this triangle?
No, the triangle. By saying...
Turn up this side like that.
By saying that the spiritual, emotional and sexual things have more bearing on our personal happiness than even the physical things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So actually this is the weightier area for us to examine.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's why it's a bit unintuitive the way I've drawn it, right? Because really the biggest area is this one. It's really like an upside down triangle, isn't it? Yeah. If we come over here, and then we'll go up the back.
Hello. This might be off topic too much, but just going back to what you said about radiation, I've been curious to ask you your take on, because there's a lot of debate on safe levels with cell phones and exposure, EMF now in the world, we're exposed to a lot more. So maybe it's too off topic to go down that train, but
but can I point out one thing, is that humans, because we haven't examined these laws, don't understand the effect of these laws on this thing. So you don't understand, for example, the effect of fear on how much radiation you can actually handle. An example of that, like the effect of an emotion and how much your body then can handle based on that emotion.
Exactly. I, for a while, got really thought a lot about EMFs. We live in a town with a university and my kids go to school, so they're surrounded by Wi-Fi all day long. And then I thought, well, the stress I'm putting on myself with this is probably worse than their exposure.
Correct. The emotional damage you're doing to yourself worrying about it is worse than the actual damage that this thing is doing to you.
And all that projected at your kids.
Exactly.
You're worried about the Wi-Fi, but you're feeling
because the laws
have
governing
more
the emotion are higher, and therefore they are going to have a larger effect. So your worry is going to be worse than the actual thing in many cases.
Mum Wi-Fi. Mum panic Wi-Fi.
Exactly. Thanks.
So and because humans haven't examined the relationship between things like the laws governing the emotional and the effect that that has on the physical, because actually most of your sicknesses are based upon. So they're not based upon the fact that you're living near a tower. They're based upon the fact you have certain emotions that cause you to respond to the environment you're in, and in a certain way, and the suppression of different emotions is going to cause your illnesses far more than any other thing will. So there's plenty of people who live in the middle of nowhere with hardly any radiation around them who still get cancer, right? So this is because humans are not examining the relationship between the laws governing emotions and the effect on the physical body. Make sense? So the hierarchy applies not just with regard to sort of individual laws and where they fall into the domain of. The hierarchy applies in the sense that these things have a domineering effect over this physical thing as well. God created it to be this way.
And even we could say the spiritual things have a domination of the emotional state we're in, and the emotional things dominate the sexual state we're in, and so on. Yeah.
So you can see the thing that is of the highest principle dominates the thing of the lowest more, right? So this is something we need to consider in the way in which we live our lives. If we keep focusing, Mary and I, look, we get so many emails about whether 5G is harmful to, whatever. And honestly, where is 5G in this scale? 5G is a physical thing created by humans here. There are laws that are going to govern it because they're based on radio frequencies that have been well established now for many hundreds of years even now. So there's laws that govern it. Your body's response to it is going to be largely determined by the emotions you have. So why are you worried about it so much? Now, there are some things, obviously, that accrue in your physical body over time. So an example of that is if you breathe bad air for a long period of time, you will get certain problems that occur because of that, because your lungs are your most sensitive organ in your physical body, in the sense that they are breathing in actual air and it's going right into your body, not like the other things that you ingest. So when you eat something, for example, it goes through your tummy and goes through a chemical process with acids and everything that dissolve everything. So what you eat frequently has less effect on you, unless it's poisonous, has less effect on you than what you're breathing, right? So your breath is going to, what you breathe in, if the air's not good, it's going to have some effect, surely. But obviously, my emotions about it are going to affect me even more than that, right? So the law, this hierarchical law, which we must understand. If we understand the hierarchy, we can start to see what we need to focus our attention on. So when it comes to 5G, why are you worried about it? It's just a creation of people on Earth, and there are laws governing it. And sure, if you get too close to a 5G or any radiation source, it may affect your body, but it's not affecting your soul, right? It's not governing your sin, which is the biggest thing that stops you from being happy. So, it may have some physical effects, and if it does, then move away from it. But honestly, it's less important than what's going to govern your soul. Now, there are certain physical things we are doing which are not very good for the environment, of course. And of course, unless we sort that out, there are going to be emotional consequences. An example of that is if we keep destroying the earth as much as we are, sooner or later, a lot of us are not going to have clean water to drink, and that's going to have a consequence on our physical body. But again, if we understood the emotion as to why we're willing to destroy our own planet, then we'd solve the problem. We'd know how to fix it. So if I knew the law, it would help me in my physical life. You follow? Yep. So if we go... Sorry, I just have a bit of a cough.
Do you want some water? Yeah. It's 20 past 5. 12.
So I want to believe that God wants us to know these laws. And it seems like the physical laws are very obvious, but the spiritual, emotional laws...
Can we say, though, historically the physical laws weren't obvious? Humans used to have a lot of beliefs about even what was happening physically around them that were false. But humans applied themselves to learning more and more about their physical...
Diligently applied themselves.
Yes.
So it's about our free will and what our desires are focused on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Less
Absolutely.
so about God providing us with the truth.
Correct.
about the
Yes.
importance of
With
these.
every physical law ever discovered, humans had to apply themselves to understand it. They had to have a desire to know. They had to have a desire to discover, a desire to experiment, a desire to work it out, right? The scientists who did all of that have benefited humanity greatly because they acted upon their desire to understand these things. They had to have the desire to know in order to understand, right? So the same is going to apply to us with these laws, isn't it? The sexual, emotional and spiritual laws. We're going to have a desire to know if we're going to have to if we're going to benefit from them. We have to know. Yep.
Yeah. And it's going to be a process, isn't it, of developing sincerity, of wanting to know, even if that's going to have some, what I perceive to be a cost to me initially. Because many times when we encounter laws of these higher in the hierarchy, we think, I don't want this law, that's going to cost me. I'm going to have to feel something, I'm going to have to give up something, and so we often, God is often trying to help us see the law, but often we are sort of rebelling or raging or blaming the law for our unhappiness rather than
our disobedience.
Yes, rather than our desire to not be in harmony with it. Yeah.
So just up the back.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering, what are the consequences of humans discovering these physical laws without taking into account the spiritual, emotional, or sexual laws that would also be attached
Very
to it?
good question.
Look at our world.
Okay, so
these are the consequences.
This is the consequence.
Yeah.
What we're living in now is the consequence. Yeah.
It's a good question though, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Surely that would be incentive enough for us to want to start to learn these other laws because it's a mess.
So if I said to myself, right, I'm going to create 5G, but I'm going to look at it from a love perspective. Is it loving to do so? What effect is that having on the environment? What effect does that have on people? If I considered the love in it, right, then I may not, even though I know how to do it, I may not do it. Mm-hmm. So an example of that is make an atomic bomb. Even though I know how to do it, right, it's good to know how to do things, but making a bomb that could, if it's used poorly, can kill millions of people at the same time, doesn't seem to be a very wise or loving course of action, even if I know how to do it, right? So the big problems that we face on earth is that we know how to do a lot of things, but love, the higher principles, the spiritual principles, are not governing our constraint of it, right? You look at what's happening with genetic modification, you look at what's happening with, things like atomic warfare, and you look at things, like that, and you can see straight away that we might know the law, the physical law, but we're not very good at understanding how to apply it in a loving manner, which is what's causing a lot of our problems. Yeah. So it's a very good thing to remember. The higher, it's more important to apply, or you could say to govern actions on the lower end of the scale by the higher principle. So if I discover a physical thing, a law that governs physical things, I would have to make sure, if I was in harmony with the whole tree, or the whole pyramid if you like, I would have to go, if I do it this way, then I'm breaking laws of love. And that wouldn't be, it's never going to turn out good, even though I know I can do it. It's not going to help me to do it, right? And if other higher principles are not adhered to. Yeah. And this is fundamentally why we have so many problems on earth. Because the humans have become so dedicated to finding the physical laws, but not applying the higher principles to govern how they are used. And you end up with huge problems then. Yeah. Ironically, many of us are doing that in our own lives. Yeah. And this is where we're not very aware. We think of it, look at what they did. Look at what they did there, but we're not looking at what we're doing. You know, an example of that is, why did they create an atomic bomb when they knew it would kill tens of thousands of people at the same time? Can you see the main reason why it was created, if you look at the history of its creation, was because of fear. Fear is what caused its creation. So here's a relationship between an emotion that's out of harmony with love and a physical device, right? And this is the thing, we don't think about those things as society very much at all, and as a result of that, we end up with lots of problems in society that appear that we cannot fix them, but actually we can if we understood the effects of the higher laws. Yeah. Well, an hour and a half went past pretty quickly there, right? Yeah. What we would like to do now, and so we'll have a break and probably have lunch now, I think. So we'd probably come back at, say, 1.
Hey?
But what we'd like to do after the break is we'd like to focus our attention on, okay, what do these physical laws look like, and what does it look like to understand the higher law, and how does that affect the lower law? And then what does that look like in my own life? Me doing that in my own life in a practical way, not just having all this theory, but what does it look like in my own life where I'm not seeing how the sin, you could say the disobedience to the law, is affecting my life? Yeah. And therefore, and if in the end we can relate that back, well, how does that then change how I view God and how my sincerity with God? How does this particular one thing cause me to be insincere with God?
Often it's like we long for God, but also I'd like to keep this thing, God, just this thing. That's perfectly justified.
Yeah. So we want to see the relationship between our relationship with God, having a sincere longing, and how these sins, even on a physical level, can be affecting our decision-making processes that then cause us to not really be sincere in what we're longing for. Right? It's great. Okay. So if we can come back at 1 o'clock?
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Yeah.